I'm floating. That's the only word for it, I guess. Floating. But there's no water, no air pushing me up. It's just a state of being. And I'm looking at this color. It's not a color I've ever seen, not on Earth. It's more like color as a feeling, a vibration. It's an impossible emerald green. So bright, it's almost painful, but not painful in a bad way. It's like looking at a perfect chord played on an instrument you've never heard. It washes over me, and with it, this feeling. Acceptance. Pure, unadulterated acceptance. Like every wrong turn, every mistake, every regret I've ever carried just dissolved. There's no judgment, none. And then this light. It's not like sunshine or a lamp. It feels like an embrace. Warm, all-encompassing, but not hot. Just right. Everything is humming, a low resonant thrum that's not a sound so much as a feeling in my bones. It's utterly, profoundly peaceful. And then I was in the hospital. My name is Elias Vance. I'm 62 years old. For the last 20 years, I've been a carousel restorer. It's a meticulous job, bringing these old mechanical horses back to life, all those intricate gears and hand-painted details. Before that, well, that was a different life entirely. Lots of spreadsheets and boardrooms and a corner office with a view. But that felt like a dream I'd woken up from. My actual life, the one I was living until recently, was quiet. I liked quiet. Every morning, I'd wake up before the sun, make a single cup of strong black coffee, and just sit by the window, watch the sky change color. I used to think about time a lot, how it just slipped through your fingers. I didn't believe in anything I couldn't touch, couldn't measure, couldn't take apart and put back together. Faith, God, souls, those were words for other people, people who needed something to hold on to. I didn't need anything to hold on to. I had my hands, my tools, and my own 2 feet on the ground. Except, of course, I didn't really have my feet on the ground, did I? Not in the way it mattered. There's my daughter, Sarah. We haven't spoken in 5 years. It was something small, something stupid that happened years ago. I said something, she heard something else, and that was it. A wall went up, a thick concrete wall, and I just let it stay there. Last week, I was working on a particularly tricky bit of carving for a 1920s carousel horse, a gilded lion. The wood was old, brittle. I remember thinking, careful, Elias, one slip and you ruin it. Just a small, ordinary thought. Did you have any sense looking back that something was coming? You know, it's funny. In hindsight, there were little things, nothing dramatic, just flickers. A few days before, I was in my workshop, and one of my antique wristwatches, a beautiful Omega my father gave me, it just stopped. Dead, right on my wrist. I figured the battery died even though it was a wind-up. I wound it and it started again, but it felt odd, like a little hiccup in the day. Then, the day before, I was at the grocery store picking up milk, and I heard music. Not from the store's speakers, but a faint, melodic tune, like a music box. I looked around, but no one else seemed to notice. I told myself I was tired, probably just a sound carrying from somewhere. I dismiss things. Always have. It's easier to dismiss things than to confront them, isn't it? Especially things that don't fit into your neat, ordered world. I was supposed to have a minor procedure, nothing serious. A routine checkup, really. They were just going to do a little something to clear an artery. Standard stuff, they said. I remember looking at my watch that morning. It was a clear, sunny Tuesday, October 17th. 10 o'clock on the dot. I was already in the operating room at St. Jude's in Memphis. It was sterile, bright, the air was cool, smelling faintly of disinfectant, and something else I couldn't quite place. The anesthesiologist was talking softly, a low, steady voice. I remember looking at the ceiling tiles, trying to find a familiar pattern. Then, the sharp sting in my arm. It was cold, then it spread. Not pain, exactly. More like a blooming numbness. A spreading electric chill that seemed to engulf my entire body. And then I felt it. A vice tightening around my chest. Not a physical pressure, but a profound internal clenching. It was the second I understood with absolute clarity that this was it. This was the end of Elias Vance. The sound started to fade. The voices became distant echoes. The light seemed to contract, pulling away from the edges of my vision. And then, nothing. Just a moment of utter stillness, a silence that swallowed everything. The surgeon said later, my heart stopped for 4 minutes and 15 seconds. It wasn't a fade. It was a tearing, like being pulled through a velvet curtain, but one that was vibrating with an unseen energy. One moment, I was aware of the monitors, the hushed voices, the cold in my arm. The next, I was elsewhere, not moving, not traveling, but simply there. It was as if the fabric of reality had thinned and I'd slipped through. I tried to grasp it, to find a metaphor that fit, like falling into a deep well. No, that implies downward motion. Like being born, no, that implies a struggle. It was more like the room I was in, the operating theater, simply ceased to exist, and in its place, this presence bloomed. And then, the first thing I registered wasn't sight, but sensation. A total absence of physical discomfort. No weight, no ache, no fatigue. My body, this vessel I'd carried around for 62 years, was just gone. And with it, all the little annoyances, the stiffness in my knee, the phantom ache in my shoulder, the dull throb behind my eyes. It was like shedding a heavy, ill-fitting coat. And then the environment. It was everywhere and nowhere. The dominant color, the only color that mattered, was this impossible, luminous emerald green. It wasn't a light source. It wasn't reflected light. It was as if the very substance of this place was green, but a green that held emotion, a green that resonated. It was the color of pure, unadulterated acceptance, a concept I'd always struggled with on Earth. The light, if you can call it that, felt like a warm, encompassing embrace. It wasn't hot, it wasn't cold, it was perfectly comforting, like being held by something infinitely gentle. And there was a hum, a low, resonant vibration that pulsed through everything. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but one I felt deep within, in the core of my being. It was the sound of existence, perhaps. And then I felt a presence, not a physical one, not something I saw with eyes. It was a recognition that bloomed from within me. It was my mother, who had died when I was just a teenager, a gaping wound in my young life. I knew it was her instantaneously. There was no confusion, no doubt. It was a wave, a tsunami of pure, unadulterated acceptance washing over me, reinforcing the feeling that permeated the place. It wasn't her form I recognized, though I sensed a comforting familiarity. It was her essence. And in that moment, the years of longing, the ache of her absence, it all just melted away. She didn't speak in words, not with a voice I would recognize. It was a knowing, a direct transfer of thought and feeling. And the message, it wasn't about me, not about my life or my achievements or lack thereof. It was about Sarah, my daughter. The message was simple, yet profound. It said, "Your daughter still loves you more than anything. She remembers the bedtime stories you told her every night, and the only thing she truly wants is for you to tell them again. She's waiting for you to stop building walls." It was so specific, so unexpected. Bedtime stories, I hadn't thought of those in years. She loved them, the adventures of Captain Blue Jay in the Whispering Woods. And all this time, I'd been so focused on my own perceived wrongs, my own self-imposed exile. I saw, not with my eyes, but with an inner knowing, a fleeting vision of Sarah, small, with wide eyes, listening intently as I read. And then that weight of that knowledge, the realization of what I'd thrown away, was immense. But it wasn't accompanied by shame or regret, not in the way I understood them. It was a clear, unvarnished truth. And the emerald green light seemed to intensify, as if in affirmation. And then the tearing again. But this time, it was a violent wrenching. It was like being dragged backward, against my will. There was no choice. The peace, the profound acceptance, it was all ripped away. I felt a desperate urge to stay, to remain in that state of pure being. I didn't want to go back to the weight, the noise, the judgment of the world. But somewhere, deep inside, a whisper. Sarah, the bedtime stories, the walls. It wasn't a conscious decision, more like a biological imperative resurfacing, a primal pull. The sensation of re-entry was horrific. It was like being forced back into a body that had been dead for days. Heavy, cold, so profoundly heavy. The sound of the heart monitor, a frantic, insistent beeping, crashed in like thunder. It was loud, jarring. The light was harsh, blindingly bright. I gasped, a ragged, painful sound, and felt the rough texture of a sheet against my cheek. I opened my eyes, or tried to. Everything was a blur of white and sterile blue. A nurse was leaning over me, her face etched with concern, but her voice was clipped, professional. "Mr. Vance, can you hear me? Welcome back. You gave us a scare." The world felt too big, too sharp, too loud, too separate. A nurse was arguing with another one about a chart, her voice sharp. "I swear, he was showing signs of waking up an hour ago. Who signed off on that?" It was absurd. The sheer mundane banality of it all after that. I was in the hospital for a week. Sarah didn't visit. I didn't expect her to. I understood, though. I finally understood. The first conversation I had with the doctor, he explained what happened. 4 minutes and change. He said I was lucky. Lucky, I just nodded. The behavioral change wasn't immediate, not dramatic. It was subtler. The first day I was back home, I sat in my workshop. The smell of wood shavings, the familiar weight of my tools. But instead of picking up a chisel, I found myself reaching for my phone. I typed in Children's Hospital Memphis. I spent the next few weeks volunteering there, reading stories. The kids, they looked at me with those wide, innocent eyes, just like Sarah used to. One afternoon, I tried to explain. I told a friend, a guy I'd known for years, about the green light, about my mother. He listened politely, then patted my arm. Elias, he said, you had a brush with death. Your brain, it conjures up all sorts of things when it's under stress. I didn't argue. What was the point? The after effect, the thing that lingers, it's the watches. They still stop. Whenever I feel that emotion welling up, that raw, unvarnished feeling, be it joy or grief or a surge of overwhelming love, my watch just ceases to tick. It's my barometer, I suppose. A physical reminder that I'm not as detached as I used to think. I quit the carousel restoration, sold the shop. I moved closer to Sarah's city. I've been volunteering at a local children's hospital, reading to the kids, the bedtime stories. I tell them all of them. And I'm building a new workshop, a smaller one, closer to her house. I haven't seen her yet, but I've been practicing stopping the walls. Last night, I wrote a letter. I didn't mail it, not yet, but I wrote it. The last line, it just said, Captain Blue Jay is ready for a new adventure, if you are. The last line, it just said, Captain Blue Jay is ready for a new adventure, if you are. It felt like a handshake across a chasm, a tentative offering. I stared at the letter, the words seeming to shimmer in the lamplight. My wrist felt heavy. I glanced down. My Omega, the one my father gave me, was dead, stopped at 3:17, 3:15. The time the doctors had told me my heart had restarted. A perfect little echo. It was more than a scare. It was a recalibration. My old self, the one who believed only in what he could see and touch, the one who built walls with such proficiency that Elias Vance was slowly, painstakingly dismantling himself. The silence in my workshop was no longer just the absence of noise. It was a space to be filled, and I was filling it, one story at a time. The children's hospital was a different world, not the ethereal green, not the encompassing light, but a vibrant, often chaotic tapestry of small dramas, tiny triumphs, quiet battles. I was just the guy with the books, the one who could conjure dragons and talking animals and brave knights out of thin air. At first, I was clumsy. My voice, so used to the measured tones of explaining intricate wood grain or the precise angle of a chisel, felt out of place. I fumbled with the pages, my concentration splintering. I was still Elias Vance, the man who'd spent decades perfecting the art of self-containment, the master of the controlled exterior. But the stories, they were a conduit. They bypassed the armor I'd so carefully constructed. There was a little girl, Lily, no older than 7, with eyes that held a wisdom far beyond her years. She was undergoing treatment for leukemia, frail, but with a spirit that flickered like a stubborn candle flame. She loved the story of the 3 little pigs, especially the bit where the wolf huffed and puffed. One afternoon, as I was reading, her small hand reached out and gripped my wrist. Her touch was feather light, almost imperceptible. And then I felt it, the familiar cessation of movement. My watch had stopped. I looked at Lily, her face pale but serene as she listened. I didn't feel the usual annoyance or confusion. Instead, a warmth spread through me. It was her. Her pure, innocent belief in the story, her simple act of connection, had triggered it. It was as if my own internal mechanisms, the ones that kept me so rigidly controlled, were responding to her unfiltered emotion. My watch, instead of being a faulty timepiece, was becoming a translator. A reminder that the invisible world, the world of feelings and connections, was as real, if not more so, than the tangible one. I'd spend hours in my workshop, the scent of cedar and pine a comforting balm. I was working on a new project, a rocking horse for a nursery I was donating to. It wasn't about restoring an antique, it was about creating something new, something imbued with hope. The intricate carving, the careful sanding, the smooth, gliding motion of the rockers, it was all a form of meditation, a way to process the immense shift that had occurred within me. I was learning to build, not walls, but bridges. Each stroke of the chisel, each smooth curve of the wood was an act of conscious intention, a prayer whispered into the material. My estranged daughter, Sarah. The thought of her was a constant, a quiet ache that sometimes swelled into a dull roar. The letter sat on my desk, unread by her. I'd reread it a dozen times, each word a stab of both regret and longing. Captain Bluejay is ready for a new adventure, if you are. It was an olive branch, a child's offering disguised in the language of fairy tales. But was she ready? Had the years of silence, of perceived abandonment, hardened her heart too much? I knew, from that other place, that she still loved me. That knowledge was a powerful anchor, but it didn't erase the chasm. One Saturday, I was at the children's hospital, reading to a group of kids. We were deep in the whispering woods, battling an imaginary dragon. The room was filled with excited shouts and the rustle of turning pages. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the open book. I looked up. Sarah. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. My heart leaped into my throat. My watch, I knew without looking, had stopped. The air in the room seemed to crackle. The children fell silent, sensing the shift. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. All the carefully rehearsed speeches, the apologies, the explanations, they all evaporated. I was back to being that clumsy, speechless man. She took a step forward, her gaze fixed on me. Then her eyes flickered to the book in my hands, to the rapt faces of the children. A faint, almost imperceptible softening around her mouth. She didn't say anything. She just turned and walked away. It wasn't a rejection. It felt more like a pause, a moment of assessment. I watched her go, a knot of emotion tightening in my chest. It was a complex blend of hope, disappointment, and a fierce, unwavering love. And my watch, in that moment, was completely still, frozen at 4:03, the time I'd been brought back. The days that followed were a strange mix of anticipation and resignation. I continued my routine, reading to the children, working in my workshop, but the encounter with Sarah had injected a new urgency into my efforts. I realized that waiting for her to make the first move, or for the perfect moment, was just another wall. The message I'd received wasn't just about her loving me. It was about her wanting me to tell the stories again, to re-engage with that shared history. I decided to take a chance. I went back to my desk, picked up the letter, and took it to the post office. My hand trembled as I dropped it into the mailbox. It felt like a leap of faith, a surrender to the unknown. Weeks passed, nothing. I tried not to let the silence gnaw at me. I focused on the present, on the small joys of my new life. The laughter of the children, the smell of freshly cut wood, the quiet satisfaction of creating something beautiful. I even found myself smiling more. A genuine smile, not the polite, reserved kind I'd perfected in the corporate world. The watches, though, continued their peculiar habit. A pang of longing for my father, watch stops. A burst of pride in a perfectly carved detail, watch stops. A moment of overwhelming peace as I watched a sunset, watch stops. It was as if my internal emotional thermostat was recalibrated and my watch was simply reflecting the fluctuations. Then, one evening, the phone rang. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was Sarah. Her voice was hesitant, a little strained, but there was a warmth there I hadn't heard in years. "Dad?" she said. Just that. Dad. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. My watch immediately went dead. "Sarah," I managed to croak out, my voice thick with emotion. It's good to hear your voice." There was a pause. "I got your letter," she said. "Captain Bluejay." A ghost of a smile in her voice. I remember those stories. My breath hitched. "Do you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes," she replied. "I do. And I miss them." The dam I'd built around my heart began to crack. Tears welled up, hot and stinging. I felt the familiar weight of my watch, a dead anchor on my wrist. "Sarah," I said, the words tumbling out now, a torrent of pent-up emotion. I made a mistake, years ago. What I said, I didn't mean it the way you heard it, and I've been so stupid building that wall. I'm so sorry." The silence on her end stretched taut with emotion. I braced myself for the familiar withdrawal, the polite dismissal. But then she spoke, her voice clearer now, stronger. "I missed you too, Dad," she said. I missed you telling me stories. And in that moment, the emerald green seemed to bloom behind my eyes, a fleeting internal echo of that place. My watch remained still. We talked for over an hour that night. We didn't resolve everything. Years of estrangement don't disappear in a single phone call. But we opened a door, a small crack perhaps, but a door nonetheless. She told me about her life, her job, her friends. I told her about the carousel horses, about the children's hospital, about the watches. She didn't question it, didn't dismiss it. She listened. She actually listened. And when I mentioned the new workshop I was building, closer to her city, she surprised me. Maybe, she said, a hint of her old playfulness returning, maybe Captain Blue Jay could have an adventure in my backyard sometime. My heart soared. I'd like that very much, Sarah, I said, my voice thick with gratitude. The next few months were a period of quiet rebuilding. I finalized the sale of my workshop, packed up my tools, and moved into a small cottage on the outskirts of Sarah's town. The children's hospital here was just as wonderful, and I quickly found a place for myself among the volunteers. The watches, they still stopped. But now it felt less like a curse and more like a gentle nudge. A reminder that I was finally allowing myself to feel, to connect, to be vulnerable. I visited Sarah's house often. At first, just for coffee, then for dinner. We talked about everything and nothing. We rediscovered each other, slowly, tentatively. I learned about the small hurts she'd carried, and she learned about the regrets I'd buried. There were moments of awkwardness, of unspoken tension, but they were always resolved, always softened by the shared history that was now being rewritten. One afternoon, while I was helping her move a bookshelf, she paused and looked at me. You know, she said, a thoughtful expression on her face, I still have that wooden bird you carved for me when I was little, the robin. My heart did a little flip. I'd forgotten about that. It had been a simple, clumsy carving, a trial run for my later work. You do? I asked, a hopeful smile playing on my lips. Yes, she said. It's on my nightstand. It's a little chipped, but it's mine. And as she said it, as the memory of that small, imperfect bird filled the space between us, I felt it, the familiar stillness on my wrist. My watch had stopped. It wasn't just the watches. I noticed other things. The world seemed to have a different texture, a different resonance. Colors seemed brighter, sounds more distinct. The taste of my coffee in the morning was more profound. It was as if I'd been living in black and white, and now the full spectrum of existence was finally visible to me. The detached observer was gone, replaced by a participant. I was still Elias Vance, the carousel restorer, the woodworker, but I was also something more. I was Elias Vance, the father who was learning to love again, to be loved again. The man who understood, finally, that the greatest restoration project of his life was his own heart. Sarah invited me to her birthday dinner. It was a small affair, just a few of her closest friends. I was nervous, I won't deny it. The old Elias would have found an excuse to stay home, but the new Elias, the one who had journeyed through emerald light and heard the echo of his mother's love, knew he had to go. I sat at the table, listening to the laughter, the easy conversation. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. And of course, my watch stopped. But this time, it didn't feel like a premonition of doom. It felt like an affirmation, a celebration, a quiet hum of contentment vibrating through my bones, a subtle echo of that other place. Sarah caught my eye and smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. And in that smile, I saw the bedtime stories, the whispered secrets, the unconditional love. The walls were gone. The adventure was just beginning. The adventure was just beginning. The feeling was so profound, so complete, that for a moment I forgot the weight on my wrist. I looked down. The Omega, my father's Omega, was utterly still, frozen at 7:07. The time my mother had passed away. A quiet coincidence, I told myself. But then I felt it, a gentle thrumming, not in my ears, but in the very marrow of my bones. It was the hum, the low, resonant hum that had been the soundtrack to that emerald green existence. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. And with it, a wave of that same impossible acceptance. I felt a familiar warmth spread through me, not the warmth of the room, but an internal glow that felt deeply familiar, deeply right. Sarah smiled again, a knowing glint in her eyes, as if she'd heard it too. Everything all right, Dad? She asked, her voice laced with a tenderness that made my chest ache in the most beautiful way. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "More than all right, Sarah," I managed to say, my voice rough with emotion. More than all right. The weeks that followed were a slow, steady unfurling. Sarah and I spent more time together. We visited old haunts, places I hadn't thought of in years. We walked through the botanical gardens where I'd once taken her on a picnic, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle. We even drove past the old house where we'd lived, the one with the creaky porch swing I'd promised to fix 1,000 times and never did. Seeing it again after so long was a strange mix of nostalgia and a quiet sadness for the lost years. But Sarah was there, her hand resting lightly on my arm, her presence a comforting balm. She didn't dwell on the past, on the reasons for our estrangement. Instead, she focused on the present, on the tentative bridge we were building. One crisp autumn afternoon, we were at my new workshop. It was smaller than my previous one, more intimate, filled with the warm, comforting aroma of pine and a hint of beeswax. I was sanding the curved leg of a small cradle I was making for a friend's new baby. Sarah was watching me, a mug of tea cradled in her hands. "You always loved working with your hands," she said, her voice soft. "I remember the toys you used to make me." I stopped sanding, the rasp of the sandpaper momentarily silenced. "I remember them too," I said, my gaze drifting to the shelf where I kept some of my older creations. Small wooden animals, a slightly lopsided dollhouse. "The wooden robin on my nightstand," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's still there." A wave of profound emotion washed over me. It wasn't just about the robin, it was about everything it represented. My clumsy attempts at love, my earnest desire to create something good, something lasting. As the feeling swelled, a familiar stillness descended. I glanced down at my wrist. The omega, my father's omega, was dead, stopped at 9:47. The time the anesthesiologist had first administered the anesthetic. It was no longer a warning, it was a marker, a signpost. The world, I'd begun to realize, was far more complex, far more vibrant than I had ever allowed myself to believe. The detachment I had so carefully cultivated was dissolving, replaced by a rich tapestry of sensation and emotion. Colors seemed brighter, the sky a deeper, more breathtaking blue. The laughter of children playing in the park wasn't just noise, it was a melody that resonated deep within me. Even the simple act of tasting my morning coffee was an experience, each sip a complex interplay of bitterness and warmth. I was no longer an observer of life. I was a participant, fully immersed in its intricate beauty. Sarah's birthday dinner was a testament to this new reality. The old Elias Vance would have found 1,000 reasons to decline, to retreat into the comfortable solitude of his workshop. But the Elias Vance who had glimpsed the emerald light, who had felt the all-encompassing embrace of pure acceptance, knew he had to be there. He had to be present. I sat at the table, surrounded by Sarah's friends, their easy laughter and comfortable banter creating a symphony of human connection. A surge of pure, unadulterated joy, a feeling so potent it was almost overwhelming, coursed through me. And as it did, my watch, my father's omega, simply ceased to tick. It stopped at 7:18, the time of my rebirth. This time, however, it wasn't a sign of impending doom or a reminder of my inherent flawed nature. It was an affirmation, a celebration, a silent, profound acknowledgement of the moment. A subtle hum, a resonance deep within my bones, echoed the hum of that other place, a comforting reminder that I was, in some fundamental way, still connected to that profound peace. Sarah caught my eye across the table and offered me a smile. A warm, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes and reached deep into her soul. In that smile, I saw not just my daughter, but a reflection of all the shared memories, the bedtime stories, the whispered secrets of a lifetime. The walls I had so meticulously built, brick by painstaking brick, had finally crumbled. The adventure, the true adventure of a life lived fully, was just beginning. The days that followed were a quiet, contented rhythm. I continued to work in my new workshop, the scent of wood shavings a constant comforting presence. The rocking cradle for my friend's baby was finished, a smooth, polished testament to my renewed purpose. It wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was an offering, imbued with the hope and love that now flowed through me. Sarah and I fell into a comfortable routine. Coffee on Sundays, Dinners on Tuesdays. We talked for hours, sharing stories, anecdotes, the small details of our lives that had been hidden from each other for so long. She spoke of her work, her passions, her dreams. I spoke of the carousel horses, the children's hospital, and yes, the watches. She didn't question me, didn't doubt my sanity. She simply listened, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding that spoke volumes. One afternoon, as we were clearing out a small closet in her home, she pulled out a dusty wooden box. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed tissue paper, was the robin. The small, clumsy wooden robin I had carved for her when she was no more than 5 years old. It was chipped, its paint faded in places, but it was undeniably mine. She held it gently, her gaze soft. "I kept him," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He always sat on my nightstand. He's a good reminder." As she spoke, as the memory of that small, imperfect bird filled the space between us, a familiar stillness settled on my wrist. I glanced down. My watch, the Omega, was dead. Stopped at 10:03, the exact time of my cardiac arrest. It was no longer a malfunction. It was a symbol, a tangible representation of the moment I had been given a second chance. The profound shift within me wasn't just a matter of emotional awakening. It felt like a fundamental recalibration of my senses. The world, once viewed through the muted lens of my carefully constructed cynicism, now vibrated with an almost overwhelming richness. Colors possessed a depth and intensity I'd never registered before. The vibrant hues of a sunset no longer merely registered as light, but as a tangible wave of warmth and awe. Sounds, too, were sharper, more distinct. The chirping of sparrows outside my workshop window was a complex melody, and the distant laughter of children playing in the park was a symphony that stirred something deep within my soul. Even the simple act of tasting my morning coffee was an occasion, each sip a revelation of subtle nuances and comforting warmth. The detached observer, the man who had meticulously curated his own isolation, was gone, replaced by a man who was fully present, fully engaged, fully alive. I was still Elias Vance, the carousel restorer, the skilled woodworker, but I was also something profoundly more. Elias Vance, the father who was finally learning to love and, more importantly, to be loved in return. The greatest restoration project of my life, I understood, was not a wooden horse or a gilded carousel, but my own heart. Sarah's birthday dinner was a watershed moment. The old Elias, the one who had built walls so high they blocked out the sun, would have found an elaborate excuse to stay home, to avoid the perceived discomfort of social interaction. But this new Elias, the one who had journeyed through that impossible emerald light and felt the echo of his mother's unconditional love, knew that presence was no longer an option, but a necessity. I sat at the table, surrounded by Sarah's friends, their easy laughter and animated conversations weaving a tapestry of human connection. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy, so potent it was almost overwhelming, surged through me. And as it did, a familiar stillness settled on my wrist. My watch, my father's Omega, had stopped. It was 7:18, the precise moment of my rebirth. But this time, the cessation of movement wasn't a harbinger of doom or a reminder of my inherent flaws. It was an affirmation, a celebration, a silent, profound acknowledgement of the moment. And as if in response, a subtle hum, a resonance deep within my bones, began to vibrate, a gentle echo of the hum that had permeated that other realm. Sarah caught my eye across the table, and her smile was different this time. It was warm, genuine, reaching deep into her eyes, erasing any lingering traces of hurt. In that smile, I saw it all: the bedtime stories, the whispered secrets, the enduring, unconditional love that had always been there, buried beneath years of silence and misunderstanding. The walls were gone. The grand, magnificent adventure of a life truly lived was just beginning. The days that followed were a quiet, contented rhythm. I continued to work in my new workshop, the scent of pine and cedar a constant, comforting presence. The rocking cradle for my friend's baby was finished, its smooth, polished surfaces a testament to my renewed purpose. It wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was an offering, imbued with the hope and love that now flowed through me with such effortless grace. Sarah and I fell into a comfortable routine. Coffee on Sundays, dinners on Tuesdays. We talked for hours, sharing stories, anecdotes, the small, seemingly insignificant details of our lives that had been hidden from each other for so long. She spoke of her work, her passions, her dreams, her voice laced with a newfound openness. I spoke of the carousel horses, their intricate beauty, and the stories they held, of the children's hospital, their bright, resilient spirits, and yes, the watches. She didn't question me, didn't doubt my sanity. She simply listened, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding that spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of the profound journey I had undertaken. One crisp autumn afternoon, as we were clearing out a small, dusty closet in her home, she pulled out a worn wooden box. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed tissue paper, was the robin, the small, clumsy wooden robin I had carved for her when she was no more than 5 years old. It was chipped, its paint faded in places, but it was undeniably mine, a tangible piece of my forgotten past. She held it gently, her gaze soft, almost reverent. "I kept him," she said, her voice thick with emotion, a tremor of nostalgia running through it. "He always sat on my nightstand. He's a good reminder." As she spoke, as the memory of that small, imperfect bird filled the space between us, a familiar stillness settled on my wrist. I glanced down. My watch, the Omega, my father's Omega, was dead. Stopped at 10:03, the precise moment of my cardiac arrest. It was no longer a malfunction, no longer a harbinger of ill fortune. It was a symbol, a tangible, undeniable representation of the moment I had been given a second chance, a gift of time to mend what had been broken. The profound shift within me wasn't just a matter of emotional awakening. It felt like a fundamental recalibration of my very senses. The world, once viewed through the muted lens of my carefully constructed cynicism, now vibrated with an almost overwhelming richness. Colors possessed a depth and intensity I'd never registered before. The vibrant hues of a sunset no longer merely registered as light, but as a tangible wave of warmth and awe that washed over me. Sounds, too, were sharper, more distinct. The chirping of sparrows outside my workshop window was a complex melody, each note distinct and clear, and the distant laughter of children playing in the park was a symphony that stirred something deep within my soul, a resonance that vibrated in harmony with the hum I had heard in that other place. Even the simple act of tasting my morning coffee was an occasion, each sip a revelation of subtle nuances and comforting warmth. A sensory experience far richer than any I had previously known. The detached observer, the man who had meticulously curated his own isolation, was gone, replaced by a man who was fully present, fully engaged, fully alive. I was still Elias Vance, the carousel restorer, the skilled woodworker, but I was also something profoundly more. Elias Vance, the father who was finally learning to love, and more importantly, to be loved in return. The greatest restoration project of my life, I understood, was not a wooden horse or a gilded carousel, but my own heart, and the mending of the bonds that had been so carelessly broken. Sarah's birthday dinner was a watershed moment. The old Elias, the one who had built walls so high they blocked out the sun, would have found an elaborate excuse to stay home, to retreat into the comfortable solitude of his workshop, avoiding the perceived discomfort of social interaction. But this new Elias, the one who had journeyed through that impossible emerald light and felt the all-encompassing embrace of pure acceptance, knew that presence was no longer an option, but a necessity. I sat at the table, surrounded by Sarah's friends, their easy laughter and animated conversations weaving a tapestry of human connection. A vibrant mosaic of shared lives. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy, so potent it was almost overwhelming, surged through me, a feeling so intense it threatened to buckle my knees. And as it did, a familiar stillness settled on my wrist. My watch, my father's Omega, had stopped. It was 7:18, the precise moment of my rebirth, the time they said my heart had restarted. But this time, the cessation of movement wasn't a harbinger of doom or a reminder of my inherent flaws. It was an affirmation, a celebration, a silent, profound acknowledgement of the moment, a marker of the new beginning. And as if in response, a subtle hum, a resonance deep within my bones began to vibrate, a gentle echo of the hum that had permeated that other realm, a comforting reminder that I was, in some fundamental way, still connected to that profound peace. Sarah caught my eye across the table, and her smile was different this time. It was warm, genuine, reaching deep into her eyes, erasing any lingering traces of hurt, of doubt, of the years of silence that had separated us. In that smile, I saw it all. The bedtime stories, the whispered secrets, the enduring, unconditional love that had always been there, buried beneath years of misunderstanding and my own stubborn pride. The walls were gone. The grand, magnificent adventure of a life truly lived, of connection reestablished, was just beginning. The laughter of Sarah's friends swelled around us, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt truly, completely at home. I raised my glass, a simple gesture that felt monumental, and met Sarah's gaze. "To new beginnings," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying the weight of years and the lightness of hope. She echoed my toast, and as our glasses touched, I felt a warmth spread through me, a quiet hum of contentment vibrating through my bones, a subtle echo of that emerald green existence, a promise of what was to come. My glass met hers, the delicate clink, a small, perfect note in the symphony of newfound connection. The hum, that faint, resonant thrum I'd carried back from the emerald expanse, seemed to swell for a fleeting moment, a quiet affirmation beneath the surface of this newly built reality. It was a promise, whispered in the language of vibration and light, that the peace I'd tasted wasn't a fleeting illusion, but a foundation upon which to build. The walls were truly gone, replaced by an open horizon, and the adventure, the real adventure, was just beginning.